Most people watch the news, see the horror in the world, and think to themselves, I can't imagine how hard that is. And then they change the channel because it's too painful to watch. Advocates, on the other hand, step up every single day to sit right next to people feeling pain. They meet people on the worst days of their lives. Victim advocates have a really unique role in this world. My work is a constant love letter to victim advocates to sit with people in the depths of hell. For their bravery, I want to thank every victim advocate on this planet. And although my role as a trainer is to teach advocates skills and theories that they may use in the line of duty, I often find that the advocates teach me much more. This podcast is my nod to the brilliant people who've attended my workshops and opened my eyes to new ideas every day. I'm Dr. Kate Watson, and this is Advocate Insights. Welcome to Advocate Insights. I'm Dr. Kate Watson, and I have a fantastic guest with me today. Today, we are joined by Jess, who is a national speaker located in the Bay Area of California. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Jess. What can you tell us about you?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me on, Kate. I love having the opportunity to chat with different people about really important topics to me. And so I was really excited when you reached out and talked to me about kind of your ideas. I am originally from Minnesota and I moved to California in 2019, and I have absolutely loved it here. And I've had the opportunity over the last about 10 years to work in sexual violence prevention in some way or another. The last 5 years, I've been focused on working with victims of domestic and sexual violence prevention and building curriculum inside of schools to help prevent the violence that we see. And lately, I have actually been speaking on my experiences to a wide variety of audiences on my experiences of child sexual abuse, intimate partner violence, and sexual violence, and helping society uncover some of the lies that we live in order to prevent the violence that we all say we want to prevent.
You have been busy, my friend. You've been busy and you're still smiling. And so before we get into, what I know brought us here, and the topic we really want to cover, I do just want to ask you, are you still having fun with this? You're smiling. Is it enjoyable for you? What do you like about it?
Honestly, I really do love the work. When I was working in advocacy, providing direct services, that became really challenging. Like, I noticed myself struggling a lot with, oh, am I doing a good job? Or how do I support people? Or what is the right thing to say? And I realized in that I loved the prevention side of it. And I loved being able to tell other people and teach other people how to be supportive. When I looked at my experiences and the things that I didn't receive that I feel would have been so beneficial for me, both as a child, a teenager, and an adult, when I experienced these, I decided, this is what we need. We need more people who can and want to speak on their experiences. And I enjoy the challenging aspects of it too. I love being able to talk with people about the nuanced situations. And really, society is craving the ability to talk about things, but sometimes there's a fear that if they ask certain questions, it can be very victim blaming. And so I have the opportunity up front to say some of our thoughts are very rooted in victim blaming myths and misunderstandings about the realities of sexual violence and domestic violence. I'm giving you an opportunity here in this moment to have these challenging conversations with somebody who's experienced this and who has made a career out of educating people on the nuances and all of the issues and statistics pertaining to these issues. So it's fun. I walk away every time learning something different about the community, learning what some more of the barriers are that I never thought existed, and also feeling really inspired by how many people come up afterwards to share their own stories with me. I think victim survivors who speak on these experiences have an opportunity to really share in that. And sometimes we feel like we're so alone because the experience of sexual violence is so incredibly isolating. And so, on the one hand, it's a beautiful thing to be able to offer space for other people to share those moments with you and to feel encouraged.
Well, speaking of nuance, which is what you were just describing, speaking of nuance, it's actually why I reached out to you. So, you had posted something on, I believe it was LinkedIn,
Mm-hmm.
and it was about the nuance of our language and the way that we talk about people who have been harmed by sexual violence, domestic violence, and the terminology that we use. You were making a really great point about the difference between the words survivor and victim. And I wonder if you could kind of capture that for our audience here.
Yeah, I have never personally identified with the term survivor. And that's always been a struggle for me as I've been processing the trauma that's happened to me over a long time and trying to figure out, how do I identify, how do I tell people who I am in this realm. And when I've worked at advocacy agencies, some agencies use the dual language of victim survivor in everything that they say and write. But I've also worked with other agencies or alongside agencies that have said, look, we meet victims, and by the end of our interaction with them, they need to be survivors. And I've always been struck by that statement because to me, it indicates that there's a shift that is expected of me as a victim, that I shift into this role. And when I try to understand why that is present, I think that it's because as a society, we are still incredibly uncomfortable with the reality of sexual violence. We don't talk about victim to survivor with other forms of crimes. We're not talking about people who've, experienced murder in their family or gun violence or robbery, even, and saying, you can no longer identify as a victim. You need to be a survivor. And so the word itself indicates to me a behavior we are expecting of victim survivors. Specifically, I think that behavior is that we don't talk about it. And if we talk about it, we only talk about it through the lens of, this happened to me and it doesn't impact me at all, which tells me that we have a really deep misunderstanding about what healing from trauma looks like. And I used air quotes there because I don't think I heal from trauma. I think I'm in a continual processing of trauma. And there are points in my life where I have processed all the trauma that my body has allowed me to remember. And then there will be other points where my body will say, hey, you're at a place now. Let's unpack some of these memories that I'm holding and let's process that and then file it neatly away so that it doesn't impact me when I don't want it to. As opposed to society looking at it and saying, I don't want to hear about your trauma, be a survivor, don't have a victim mentality, which, a victim mentality is vastly different than acknowledging that I was a victim of something. Something happened to me, and that trauma has impacted me in ways that somebody who hasn't experienced that particular trauma has had impact them, right? Victim mentality would tell me that I have no power over my life. There's nothing I can do. Everything I do is going to cause harm, or I'm just never going to be successful. That's not the same as acknowledging I had something horrific happen to me, and that's how I identify. I was a victim of sexual assault. I was a victim of child sexual abuse. I was a victim of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. I think that we need to encourage victim survivors to use words that they feel empowered by. And the other thing that I had recently talked about was the idea that I can't be a victim, say that I am, and yet still be empowering to other people. Right. So I think that's important that we understand the difference between a victim mentality versus a victim in this realm.
Yeah. So a lot there. And before you even mentioned victim mentality, I was listening to you and I started to think about that phrase. And then I was happy you brought it up because I was recently in a conversation with someone and we were talking, it was kind of unrelated to this, but we were just talking about social circles and who you surround yourself with. And he said, I never surround myself with people who have a victim mentality. I hate that and I don't like people like that. And there are no, and I think he even said there are no victims in my group.
Mm,
And I thought I get I get what you're saying, Jess, that these are different things. I agree. Being a victim and having a victim mentality are different things, which is why I wish we didn't even call it a victim mentality. I wish we had a different phrase
yeah.
a hopeless mentality or a
Mm,
powerless mentality, or I don't know, I'm making this up off the top of my head.
mhm.
But victim mentality, I think, does make it confusing for people. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. And I think that that's something that's so important when we talk to therapists or when we're educating the community on the importance of therapy with victims of sexual assault in particular, especially children and victim survivors of child sexual abuse, incest and anything that was a little bit more pervasive and or it happened at a point in your developmental stage where you're still building your worldview. For me, when I was first victimized, I was still building what my world looked like. And I dissociated like so many children of child sexual abuse do. And so I didn't recall important bits and pieces of the experience until I was in my teenagers, where again, I was developing what a worldview looked like. And so I think that therapists are really prime to be able to have this opportunity to help victim survivors as they navigate understanding that a singular moment of victimization does not indicate fault or failure. And that when we talk about building up preventative measures or looking at ways that we can empower people to not repeat the cycle of violence, we're not pinning fault on you. And I think sometimes when we talk to victims of domestic violence, sometimes it can feel that way when you hear sometimes when they talk about it, they're like, well, I went to therapy and I realized all of the things that I did to enter into this relationship. And I think that on one hand, we have to look at it and recognize that I exist in this world and there will be people in this world who will choose to violate and use my vulnerabilities as a way to gain power and control because of their own inabilities to feel powerful and to feel powerful. And so the fact that people exploit vulnerabilities doesn't and shouldn't indicate that it's my fault that it happened. And so there's a difference in the language that we have to be using. I think even talking from a perspective of victim mentality can be really harmful because it almost says that you can't confirm or empathize or validate somebody who's had a really hard life and who's having a really hard time figuring out how to navigate all of the emotions that are following them with every decision that they make, on top of dealing with other clear areas of issues with oppression and the layers of privilege and how all that impacts us. I think people have power and therapists should be encouraging us to figure out where that power is, but we have to make sure that we're not shaming people in the process of of engaging in, hey, this would make you really powerful. Here's some red flags, right? Like, what do you want in a relationship? What is it that you want? And how do you get that? How do you advocate for yourself? How do you set boundaries? How do you hold those boundaries? That's empowering. That's helping victims of domestic violence relook at their world and their relationships without actually saying, well, you didn't really pay attention to the red flags, did you? As opposed to recognizing that many of us walk into these relationships with domestic violence abusers because they're presenting themselves in a way that allows us to feel incredibly safe.
They're good at it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's people don't they get scared about having to acknowledge it. groomers and people who groom us to violate us, child sexual abuse, sexual assault, intimate partner violence, grooming is not simply a process of, making people numb to the violence that is happening. It is actually the insidious nature of it is making it acceptable, making it understandable. And victims of domestic violence may start to internalize some of those messages. So I no longer needed to go to my partner to know that I was crazy. I was telling myself that I was crazy, right? And as a victim of child sexual abuse, when we talk about good touch versus bad touch, well, what happens when the touch feels good, right? How am I supposed to tell somebody that somebody's touching me in a way that makes me feel good? Because we exist in bodies, and bodies have sensory needs and sensory input. And when groomers are doing what they're doing, they're not doing it because they want to harm children. It is harming children, but they're not thinking of it through that lens. They're thinking, I want to do this. It feels good to me. I want it to feel good to them as well, so they can do it over and over and over again. So society just really struggles to understand and really comprehend all of the nuance in these situations. And that's probably what everybody will walk away with. There's nuance to it.
And in my experience, we as humans are good at a lot of things, but nuance is not one of them.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Part of what drew me in to your post that I saw on LinkedIn as you were discussing this, the words victim, the word survivor, and the sense we're trying to make of these words. I suppose I was drawn in because working in this field, there's this pervasive sense that one word is good and the other word is bad. That survivor is a good word, victim is a bad word. That's just seems to be like in the air at conferences I go to and meetings where I am, and like people pat themselves on the back for being like a good professional because I used the good word. I didn't use the bad word. And when I have used the quote unquote bad word of victim, I can see people crossing their arms and letting out a heavy sigh. And I suppose my little defense of the word victim comes from the fact that I come from the policy world. I have a degree in policy. And if you want to go stand in front of your representatives in government and advocate for change at a policy level, you have to show them that harm is being done. You have to show them there are victims in your community. Your constituents are victims. They are hurt. They are harmed. And it's hard to make the case that we need to make big changes if everyone's surviving. And so I just come from this probably more academic space, but where there's actually utility to the word victim, and it may not always feel good, but that's also how we can make meaningful change in the world, is to show the people in power that some bad stuff is going on here. And I know this word doesn't feel good, but you need to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've said this, and I've heard so many other victim survivors of child sexual abuse even talk about this, that the only difference between us and a child that was murdered was that we are forced to carry around that body. We are forced to live inside of the body that was violated and learn how to re-identify with it. And I will never know what that little girl would have become, right? Sometimes people say, oh, well, look at everything you've been able to do now. Look at all the people you've been able to help. And yeah, I'm grateful that I have the ability and the desire to speak on this. There are many more who don't want to do that, and that is perfectly acceptable. But I don't believe or buy into this system that I needed to experience this in order to help other people. And I think that that's a struggle that society has, that you're right, that if there's survivors, that means that this isn't as harmful. And we see this even politically within policy work of what people are charged with when it comes to sexual assault, right? Murder always carries the potential of capital punishment, which I'm not suggesting that that should be happening, whereas sexual assault does not. Sometimes you get 5 years, sometimes you get 2 years. You have the option to plea out. Now that's litigation, right? That's for every crime. You can always plea down to a lesser charge, but it happens often within sexual assault, and so the world doesn't tend to look at this like it's as big of an issue or creates as much harm as we know psychologically child sexual abuse does, that it intersects in so many different areas. The higher your ACE score, how well you can perform, but right, how long you'll live, whether or not you get cardiovascular disease, depression, right, eating disorders, all of these things are interconnected to the experience of child sexual abuse, and even more so as we move up in age and how we experience violence. So it's it's interesting, and hopefully things will start to shift as more victim survivors speak out and more advocacy groups start speaking out about the importance of recognizing harm, that harm is happening, and that's what we need to pay attention to.
Okay, so the word of the day is nuance.
Yeah.
And I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're asking the listeners to just not oversimplify this as there's one good word and there's one bad word. There's complexity to this. Is there anything you haven't said yet that you'd like to make sure you say?
Yeah, I think when people come forward and they talk about their experiences, allow them to choose the language that makes sense for them. And we shouldn't be challenging victim survivors ever, but if a victim survivor themselves is saying things that are harmful in the sense of like, I know I should be a survivor, I know I should be over this, that our challenge to them should be, it is okay to feel the way that you do in this moment. It is okay if this changes, and it is okay if you're here in this angry moment for a little bit. You were violated, and that wasn't okay, and I'm here with you to validate you in that.
What's something that you feel like you're maybe still discovering, still wrestling with, or is this it, the thing that we've been talking about? Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think the thing that I most started to grapple with is my identity or my ideas around what healing looks like. And instead of focusing on my therapy and saying, when is it just going to be done? Like, when am I going to stop feeling this way? And instead, learning to have grace for myself. And what I literally just asked all of the listeners to say, I wish more people would say that to me. Jess, it's okay you're having a hard day today. It's okay that you're struggling to understand why this was done to you. You're not weak, you're not pathetic, you're not stupid, you're not immature. It is normal and it is okay to go through life with ups and downs and acknowledge that there have been some downs in your life that are unfair, and that you don't need to just be like, well, life is unfair, right? Life is unfair, and we all experience trauma and hardships, and it is okay to experience what processing those hardships and trauma points look like for you.
Thank you for saying that. I am getting the sense that you do a really nice job of being in your own corner, and we all deserve a few other people in our corner. And so you're right. Like, for someone to do that for you would be exactly what you deserve. So thank you for saying that. Jess, this has been so helpful. Thank you for joining us today. To the listeners, if you have any questions or comments or feedback, please send me a message at kate@advocacyacademy.org. That's Kate, Kate, at advocacyacademy, like it's all one word.org. I'd be happy to hear from you there. You can also find us on Instagram, Threads, YouTube, using the handle at AdvocateW. So that's Advo, ADVO, then my name, Kate W. So altogether, it becomes Advocate W. Check us out next time when we explore more advocate insights.